pasakysiu kelis žodžius lietuvių kalba, o po to pereisiu į anglų kalbą, nes pristatysiu mūsų kolegą iš Jungtinių valstijų, Josephą Pilotą, iš Jungtinių valstijų Ohajo valstybinio universiteto, Algio Mickūno taip pat didelį draugą, kolegą ir kai kurių knygų autorių. Now I would like to switch on English, and I would like to present Professor Joseph Pilotta from Ohio State University, but stop a little bit or wait, I just only start to present you, but not finished. Okay, I have a lot of words about you, but you know, I met him. He is expert of China, different deals and philosophy and communication, as well as he is involved in communicational studies, technical sciences studies, and philosophical studies. He works a lot together with his friend Algis Mickūnas, and he was few times in Lithuania and started to read lectures. Here I met him in his lecture on Theodor Adorno, Negative Dialectics and Atonal Music, and it was a very good lecture. But because somebody from you doesn't know him, I would like to invite Algis Mickūnas a little bit, say a few words about your friend.
Okay. I have to lie, because if you don't lie about somebody, you will not be a friend. Well, Joseph was my colleague, a student, and at the same time co-worker. We crossed many borders, snuck weapons and smuggled things, specifically good beer. And so what happened is that he decided to come to Lithuania with me. There was a conference, we had a project, and he was able to make it. And then he fell in love with the snow and ice, and he likes cold. And so we were slittering all over Vilnius. Then he decided that he should help Lithuania and buy Vilnius. The whole Vilnius as a property. And he made a deal. The day before, we were at City Hall, talked to various grand officials, and they agreed that they will sell Vilnius to Joe and establish various other programs, including Confucian Institute for practical purposes, and that is that commerce, law studies, exchanging of students from China who will come to study to Lithuania in English, of course. So that means Lithuanians have to start teaching in English more courses. So, Joe, you're on. I said too much.
Well, thank you for the kind words. Yes, unfortunately for me, the lecture is in English. Unfortunately for you, for some of you, you have to listen to the lecture in English, but I'll try to say some funny things, and that way you may get a chuckle out of it, even if you don't understand every word I say. A question that many people have asked me, seeing they know I'm involved in doing things in China, is how come China got so strong with a big global economy, so strong and powerful, like overnight? Well, it actually has been almost overnight if you compare it in terms of Chinese history. That overnight actually started, if I had to pinpoint a date, that overnight started about 1976. And with Deng Xiaoping coming to the fore, and in 1978, one thing happened for sure. Deng Xiaoping formally launched the Great Experiment in Capitalism in 1978. What he did was create something called the China International Trust and Investment Corporation to be the experiment on capitalism. He gave the corporation equivalent to $5 million US dollars, and says, go make money and don't fail. Of course, he did help them out a bit. What he did was he hired some people, brought them back actually from exile, who were in Hong Kong. He brought with him to China 4 investment bankers who spearheaded the China International Trust and Investment Corporation to become that experiment in capitalism. Now, why did he do it in 1978? Well, certainly he did it because it was in the wake of Mao. Things were not going well. Things had to have a change. He saw a particular direction. His famous dictum, I don't care if it's a white cat, black cat, as long as it catches the mouse. He didn't care what you call it. Call it socialism, call it communism, call it capitalism. I don't care. Nevertheless, he was able to get and formulate the CITIC company. The CITIC company actually was put in place for another reason, just the experiment. It was actually to be able to get and take over Hong Kong when Hong Kong went from the British back to the Chinese in 1997. So he was planning at least 20 years ahead of time. So that's kind of long-term planning. The second thing that was done was he decided that in this transition there is going to be much upheaval, much probably discontent. Things hopefully will be good, and what he did, he resurrected the name of Confucius. And consequently, the Confucius centers, which we mentioned earlier, Albus mentioned earlier, were initiated around 1981. So the first of them started in mainland China, and then they spread. I think now there's about 390 something or other. Give or take a few, depends where they come and go. But there's quite a few of them. Nevertheless, that started the overnight success of China. Now, that doesn't tell you much. That just says when it started and who started it. But there's a couple things that go along with this that make it very important. What I'm going to do today is actually just focus on one dynamic of that meteoric rise to success, and that is focus on what we might call, in this case, microeconomics. Microeconomics sometimes is, for me, typically it's balancing my checkbook. But for others, sometimes economists, it's a little bigger than that. The fact of the matter is, in microeconomics, we have to look a little bit at, in China, what we might call township enterprises. You know, right now in China, while there are major cities, there are many more people out in townships and villages across China than in the cities. However, there is much happening in those townships over the last several years that actually have gone unnoticed. And that actually has been the underlying belly that has kept this China engine moving and being as successful. What we have is a couple things. Probably if you were to read any Confucius, he will talk about the relationships of, there are subjects. In duality, if you will, there's the emperor and the subject. There's the father and the son. There are the brothers. There are, quote, the family. Then there is finally friends. There are these rings. If you put a pebble, throw it into the water, you'll see it splash and ripple out. Well, these ripples represent the layers of, quote, rings or family levels that you have between the emperor, between the family, and between your outer acquaintances. The interconnected set of relationships have become known as something called guanji relationships. Now that term has been translated by everybody into many different ways. However, a couple things are consistent in the translations, and that is that there is something called relationships, interconnectedness. There is something called relationships of and I want to use my hands this way because the interconnectedness is more like this, okay? And the reason I do that because one of the character for guanji relationships is actually a customs door that you pay tariffs, and the door has to swing open and close. So consequently, the relationship is an opening and closing of doors between and amongst people. They are interconnected. That interconnection is in the swinging door. The hinge becomes the connector. Now, consequently, these interconnections are not built just on grease like door hinges are, or many of the ancient times with wood and a linchpin. However, these interconnections are actually glued together by, quote, affectations. Not affectations like in the bad, but affection. They have to be, to build guanji, to build these interpersonal relationships, they have to be couched in, quote, good feelings. How do you get good feelings? Well, you know, it's not surprising that it might be good if you hung out with people, had some interaction with people, maybe go to parties with people, maybe eat together. You might even want to, on holidays, give them a gift. They may end up by giving you a gift, but you build up over time some good relationships that are strong, and you feel good that you might have confidence, trust, if you will, in those people you are having these relationships with. That is part and parcel of the relationships within the Confucius family of relationships. Also, there is a notion of, in Chinese, you probably have heard the expression, not to lose face. Well, many times in our cultures, we have a tendency to talk about not to lose face, which essentially has the notion that literally, if you are embarrassed, literally major embarrassed, you are literally, quote, it is like losing one's face, like having it cut off. But there is also the notion of to give face. And that notion of to give face is to be able to get and pay tribute, and I use the word tribute, not favor or any other word, but tribute, is to elevate and pay tribute to a superior. Now that may be an intellectual superior, it may be a superior meaning your boss, whatever the case may be, but it's to give him, if you will, elevation. That elevation also elevates you. The other side of the coin is true as well. To devalue the other is to devalue yourself. So as he loses face, you lose face at the same time. So your objective, in one sense, if you wish to call it that, is to constantly elevate one's face and not devalue your own. Another element that's very key to this whole relationship is to essentially, if you will, it's not necessarily always reciprocity in the notion of giving favor, while it's often translated as giving favors to people, that it's a reciprocal obligation, and I'm not saying that doesn't hold true, but it also can mean, like tribute, that you may give something to someone, in China lore, and actually in China today. Somebody may give you something. Maybe the expectation is that you will repay them in some way. However, the time in which it is asked to be repaid is never given, ever. And the size of the repayment is not given. So, theoretically speaking, I may give you a Mercedes. I necessarily, probably would not necessarily expect totally to get a fountain pen in return. But nevertheless, it could happen and it could be accepted. The fact of the matter is they are not specific. They all know that one would give in relationship to what is appropriate, given the station in one's life, given the appropriate context in one's life. What are the specific circumstances in one's life? Now, that notion of guanji and connectedness with all the virtues that go along with that is just one component. But more to the economic side of it, if you will, this is the ethical side. This is the one that builds confidence and trust. That's the Confucius side. But there's another side that comes with this, and that is the side that essentially says this: we will, as a group, support another's endeavors. Here's how we're going to do this. If this was not contemporary China, they may say in this particular township enterprise, this man, this family needs a new wagon. So what we're going to do, he also needs a new team of horses to plow, or some mules, whatever the case. Now, because it's a township enterprise, we all make money from the enterprise. Therefore, we need to help him make sure that he becomes much more, he can get and make his money so we can make our money. So what we do is we make him a debtor, we become the creditors. So what happens is we end up by pitching in with maybe the feed, the horses, maybe even some money, and it's all there. However, somebody must need to compile these resources. Now, who is going to compile these resources? Well, in the township enterprise, it is what they use the affectionate term, the local emperor. The local emperor has a great deal of, if you will, power. In many cases, he has had great guanji with a member of people, and he has helped them out in many different activities. So therefore, he is trusted. At the same time, besides being trusted, he also has the access to these resources. People know he's got guanji, not only with them, but with other groups, other families. So he can go out and capture these resources, bring them in. Now he becomes a creditor, he becomes the debtor to the others who are creditors. So as he brings in the resources, he becomes the debtor, they're the creditors. Internally, he may be the creditor, the person who's getting it is the debtor, and the other people giving the resources also become creditors, and the guy who needs the new wagon is the debtor. Now, this typically happens with no assets, no money up front. It's not like big banks where you have all these kind of assets and they say, well, you know, if you had $3 million, we could allow you to buy $200,000. You can borrow that, $200,000 if you have $3 million. Well, that's good. Sound economics. However, that's not the case of the way it is in the China townships. Now, take this model and let's just put it in present-day circumstances. They take this model and you put it in present-day contemporary China, and you take the very same thing. Now, the local emperor is now the party secretary. The party secretary, and there are 700,000 party secretaries across China. And so a party secretary in the township enterprises can draw upon party secretaries that might be in the ministry or maybe in the economic commission in another township. Either way, they can draw on these Guanji connections. This particular now party secretary goes and distributes, allocates, distributes, and makes it happen. Now, here's the promise. The promise to all the creditors are, including the person who has the idea, we're all going to participate in the profit. That's the promise. Including the local emperor, the party secretary. He or she gets a part of that as well. All the creditors get their money back plus. And the debtor, original debtor, gets his as well, or her. All right? That's how it works. In one sense, now let's go one step further, the local emperor, the party secretary, acts as the local bank. Essentially, the party secretary is the local bank in the township enterprises. So therefore, if indeed the party secretary needs cash, the party secretary ends up by going to the local bank. Of course, he has to get approval from the central banking people in the Bank of China and the party. And if they all approve it up and down the line, he ends up by becoming the distributor of the money to the person who needs the money. Okay? And perhaps he might be able to even buy those resources at that particular time. Now, why is this so critical? It is so critical because now it's just not township enterprises doing tractors with horses. This structure runs up and down the line, whether it's in township enterprises, big cities, small cities, big factories, medium factories, all of it. And the fact that they can keep profits already introduces the capitalistic economy. The pool of resources is the socialistic economy. The Guanji relationships and the ethicality goes with it is the Confucian ethics. And all of a sudden, you got three prongs coming together, which is quite unique in contemporary economic thinking. Capitalism typically works if there are assets hanging out there. That didn't sound right. If there are assets. But nevertheless, in this case, there need not be any. And this has historically been the case since the since in terms of the experimental capitalism, certainly in terms of the 80s, but in terms of the actual, really blood and guts version of entrepreneurship, because now that allocator, that one who's been allocated the resources, the debtor, the one who needed the money, he is what we, in Western terminology, become a true entrepreneur. He starts out with an idea. He starts out with how to mix the notion of production. And what he does as an entrepreneur, the true nature of an entrepreneur is one who has a good idea, but has absolutely no money, no assets, and somebody's willing to trust him or her with the idea to make it come through. And that person who has the idea is called the wealth owner. And that wealth owner is the one who says, I can risk it. That's it. That's called your venture capitalist, which there are now becoming venture capitalists among the Chinese class. So consequently, you start seeing how this all plays between the tradition, part of the China legacy, the free market or capitalistic market. I don't like to call it free market. It's really not. It's capitalistic market, how that all works, and how good old socialism, where it's all a part of the reciprocity motive, they're all sharing together, how they're all getting, quote, upwards. Now, somebody's going to say, yeah, but isn't there corruption? Yes. Isn't there backdoor politics? Yes. Does this work really quick? No. Is there a lot of bureaucracy? Yes. Is it working? Yes. Is it going to fail soon? No. Why? Because if you think about where it's been and where it's going, right now they've made another turn, and it's a big turn. Just when the world was getting used to the fact that the doors were open in China, the open door policy is now the closing door policy. Because if you heard the recent announcements the last couple of years, China now has to look inward to take care of its companies who have grown so they can start producing more and more goods for the Chinese consumer. Because they need the consumer now to spend more money. Because what has happened is, one of the things they didn't plan on, and there is a non-planning aspect, is while all this good news was happening, the gulf between the agrarian society and the village and the city societies have enlarged. There's a bigger gap. At the same time, wages have gone up. Inflation. Okay, so now we have to change the strategy. So the strategy is, now if you're an outsider, how do you get to be an insider that can, quote, export into China and still able to compete in such a way that you can be part of the inner China market as opposed to the open door China policy. Now that does not mean everything is going to be closed down. It just means that there's going to be a dominant term. Now, there are a lot of things that China still looks for and needs for, but its money is being placed elsewhere. And they are developing other kind of, if you will, models in other countries. Certainly like Latin America is one big one. Certainly Africa and some other third world marketplaces. But generally speaking, it's bringing the three: socialism, Confucianism, and, if you will, capitalism. None of them are pure. None of them have been completed. But they are all working together in one sense, for good or bad, and it's still chugging along. Is it as good as they say it is? I've done this, I've been around China for a long time. I look at it this way: if it's half as good as they said, that's still twice as good as the United States. So, I mean, there's really not, what can you say? So I want to thank you for your attention. That's the short course on how China has made it. I hope it wasn't too laborious. Thank you.
It's about do you find a relationship with potlatch? Do you know this potlatch theory of gifting for social dignity, for social honor, that was popular between North Indian, North indigenous, North American, and then it was popular between anarchists and left libertarians, and they wrote a lot about potlatch, but public potlatch as well as potlatch as holiday, to gift a holiday for local people as possible socialist or anarchist system. Do you find this relation? How do you think, is potlatch popular in China?
Is it popular in China? I guess if you're Chinese Eskimo, yes. But the fact is no. There has been several theorists who've tried to make, well, French Marxists like to make something out of a lot of things. But the French Marxists have tried to make potlatch into, quote, the ultimate socialism or ultimate communism. Then they try to equate it with Joseph Schumpeter's creative destruction, because everybody goes into a frenzy and a dance, and they take all the gifts and they throw it down and they break it. All right, and somehow that's Joseph Schumpeter, and then we've got the version of socialism. Everybody brings all things together. Now, none of them has a tendency to give anything I mean, nothing comes close to this particular amalgam. It's a nice metaphor. It actually may be even a nice metaphor for reciprocity, but at the same time, there's another interpretation is, it's just a dance and they're just doing crazy things. And when they dance, they dance randomly, they dance energetically, and when they dance, they get, quote, they break things. I mean, it's not like great symbolic that everybody has to be in the symbolism. Now, I'm not positing that is the answer. I'm saying it could be just as that, because I've seen as many different interpretations of the potlatch, just as well as I have seen, it's got to be at least 500 interpretations of Marcel Maus's the gift relationship, including, God rest, well, he should rest, but Derrida, who obviously couldn't find the free gift. If he would have went to Japan or China, he would have found it, but he couldn't find it, and so which means his powers of observation weren't so great. So I think basically, let's leave the potlatch where, you know, Eskimos have it, they have their own potlatch, it's good.
But not for the God. I have here.
I'm a bit skeptical regarding your, I would say, very optimistic ideas regarding the future activities of Confucius Institutes around the world, because as probably you know, Vilnius University 3 years ago has established Confucius Institute. It was the first among 3 Baltic states. But nowadays we are facing quite many troubles. In what sense? Certainly this is the hugest, it's the biggest worldwide network of Chinese political, cultural self-representation. And the Chinese government, Communist Party, is investing a huge amount of money for all kind of activity, but certainly as a kind of soft power of contemporary China, it has behind of all kind of formal language training, etc. activities, political intention. It cannot be compared with, British consuls or Goethe institutes. It is working much more effectively. So actually it shows that on the higher level of Chinese Communist Party, decision was made to establish this network to provide Chinese political rulers some kind of instruments to change a world, or to change understanding of China.
Want me to answer that? Sure, okay.
Take that now.
Oh, I can take that one. Well, I guess I don't think I said, if you can hear me. I got it. Technology is a real problem.
Chinese. It's Chinese.
Yeah, I'm Chinese. Chinese, no, actually.
Made in China.
Made in China, yeah. Actually, I guess I didn't say I was optimistic, at least in this presentation, about the Chinese institutes. Chinese institutes are, Confucius institutes, I'm sorry, are Chinese institutes. The fact of the matter is, are they political ideologies being shipped? Yes, they are, unequivocally. And America sends them too. So we got dueling ideologies. I guess that it's nothing new in the world. I'm not of the mind that just because an ideology shows up, you're automatically transfixed into being a Chinese lover. But nevertheless, I guess if you think that, that's okay. I would suspect most people become receptive of Chinese Confucius institutes for a couple reasons. One, they like to get the language training, and number two, maybe more importantly, I like to get the cash, which is can be as much as 400 grand a year. The question is, can you get it? And then the question is, can you do what you want until they stop you? And if they do and they stop you, then punt. It's that simple.
Other question? Again?
Voila, thank you. The Chinese, I don't know how to call it, propaganda machine or advertisement, they are also employing Sun Tzu, The Art of War, which was written for art, but now Sun Tzu, there are, I think, 1,200 books on Sun Tzu as peaceful competition. How to play golf with Sun Tzu. How to play chess with Sun Tzu. How to dance with your lover with Sun Tzu. So we can, like Lithuanians I know are very young and very smart and very mobile, you can invent a new dance. Sun Tzu, Sun Tzu.
Do you have a comment?
Do we have? Actually, in the United States, by the way, I was going to comment, Sun Tzu became popular in the United States when middle managers of corporations in the United States were trying to find better ways, I should say better ways to keep their jobs, because their companies weren't producing, they were trying to be more productive. And they ran out of all the management theories, and all the management training seminars went out of business because they couldn't find anybody to train them to make it work. So because the funding all dried up for corporations sending their managers to places like Reno, Nevada, Las Vegas, Paris, France to have management training, finally they just latched on Sun Tzu and they started training seminars in Sun Tzu. But eventually, after about 2 years, that went out of fad. But then the fad of other books came about that everything was Sun Tzu. So, you know, one thing about the world of co-optation is before anybody's co-opted anymore, the world of mass media and the world of popular culture will grab it first. And once they grab it, you end up by seeing it very quickly sometimes for what it is. So I think, you know, there'll be more Sun Tzu books coming out. I think there'll probably be another book out soon that says, what did one Confucius center say to the other? And I think that'll probably be the next one.
The last question.
Well, I haven't had the time to follow this much, but this is something to do with the soft power and the ideologies, and there is a difference in our ideologies in the West and there's still I don't know how much Confucianism is in the communist ideology itself, but the case of the New York University, I don't know if he's a professor or a student or whatever, he was a dissident in China, and now because of the money, China is putting pressure on New York University to send him out or silence him, and so I think this is sort of the really the negative side, and brings out the issues of our morality, our moral standards, and trade is fine, but and also with Google and other forms of information and control of information, where I see there's more of this old Soviet-style communist ideology than Confucianism.
Well, there's the fact that, yes, I mean, and I think you'll find China continuing to pressure wherever they can. Soft pressure, but nevertheless pressure. But you know, and this is not a question of acquiescing. This is a question of where the real politics are. The real politics are, and who's got the biggest debt to who. That really does take center stage, as opposed to the New York University thing. They will come down. They will censure. They won't censure the guy. They will give the money back, and there'll be some sort of détente in the corner. Nobody wants to have a fight. U.S. isn't going to have a fight. with China. China's not going to have a fight with the U.S. because all they have to do is call in the note. I mean, that's a big enough fight. I think you will find more and more of this happening as opposed to less and less. But it will be more saber rattling. And every time we get to issues where there's supposed to be a discussion about the currency issue, as to whether there's going to be some sort of a blockade on, not blockade, but increased tariffs on trade. Every time one of these issues start chiming up, ratcheting up, you will see something come out of China, which tries to, rattle somebody or to catch their attention. And as you know, things are right now percolating in terms of the currency again, also percolating in terms of trade tariffs again, and issues of who's spying on who. That's up there again. So, there's always a dislocate and exploit. So let's point to the guy in New York University, because that's where they want the focus. I mean, I'm not saying politicians around the world don't do that. They all do it, but nevertheless, I think this is one of them. That's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. Now ačiū už